the committee having adjourned, having been reached, Monday, January 24th, 2022, meeting of the Water Quality Committee will come to order. We're doing it via Zoom today, partly because of COVID, but mostly because the agenda is reasonably short and lends itself to Zoom. So we can start with Matt Charette with a presentation on the latest November sampling results for the permeable reactive barrier project.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Let me get into presenter mode and my laser pointer here. There we go. Okay. So I guess I last gave you an update on the project back in October 2021. We've met a couple of times, or at least once, as our advisory committee, most recently late last week. I'm going to give you a much abbreviated version of that presentation, but you've been given access to all of the data slides. So, if you have any questions about any of the details, feel free to ask them. But today I want to give just a summary of how the PRB is performing in nutrient data that was collected from August and November of 2021 and just recently completed in January of this month. And then we'll talk about this in detail possibly at the next meeting, but Kristen and I had a really great conversation with Tim McCobb from USGS, and he's got the particle tracking model that we've seen in many different forms at our committee meetings in the past, and is willing to help us out by running that model for the Shorewood PRB and give us an idea of actually where is the nitrogen coming from that we are treating at this location. So stay tuned for details at a future meeting on that collaboration. All right, this is the only slide I'm going to show today. Again, if you have any questions about any of the others, I'm more than happy to entertain those. But this is just a summary of the 1-year PRB on the left and the 2-year PRB on the right. And in the blue bars is the nitrate concentration at the control wells. These are the wells that are up gradient of the PRB. So this is the nitrate that's coming into the site. These are both at the -8 foot below sea level within the PRB. The first monitoring wells downstream or down gradient of the PRB are in orange for both cases. And then the down gradient wells 110 feet and 50 feet in the case of the 1 and the 2-year PRB are shown in the gray bars. I'll start with the 2-year treatment because you've heard in many updates in the past that that's been working quite well from almost from the get-go. The PRB was installed in July, and so you can see in the first sampling event just a month later, the well that was just 15 feet down gradient, we already saw near complete nitrate removal. Still a little bit of nitrate in the 50-foot down gradient well, but by November and all the way through to these latest 2 periods that you're seeing results for the first time, the nitrate is near background levels. So the PRB is performing very, very well about, 16 months post injection. So November 2021 would be the most recent data that we have for this site. So that's great news, very exciting, continuing to perform as expected. The surprise that we found in the most recent set of data for the 1-year treatment, you remember, you look at the orange bars, that really never really kicked in. And so that was a bit of a puzzle to us. And we have our best guess as to what's happened there is that we didn't have a good distribution of the emulsified vegetable oil. And so there were sort of holes or gaps in the PRB, so to speak. as our main leading explanation for why the 1-year treatment side was not performing well. However, fast forward to November 21, and we're seeing very low levels of nitrate at multiple depths for the 1-year treatment PRB, which caused us to wonder how, why has this all of a sudden kicked in 16 months after the initial injection. And we talked about this at length in our working group meeting. There's a number of possibilities. One is probably the simplest possibility is that there's sort of a slight change in groundwater flow direction. So we're seeing the results of the 2-year PRB at this 1-year PRB monitoring well. Other possibilities are there's sort of been a heavy rainfall, as we all remember, during the fall of last year between August and November. That may have had something to do with this 1-year side kicking in. Either way, it's neither good nor bad news. It's just a bit of a puzzle as to why has that decided to kick in so late after the EVO was installed in July of 2020. So that's sort of the update I wanted to give you today. We have 2 more quarterly monitoring events before the project, at least with the EPA funding that we have in hand, wraps up. We're talking about getting the other PRB research teams from across the Cape and Martha's Vineyard together in some format as early as this summer for working group discussion. We'll, of course, keep you all posted on what's happening there. But other than that, I think that's sort of what I wanted to cover today. Are there any questions?
Any questions, any comments?
Matt, you referenced close to background levels. What are you using as a reference there as your quote background levels when you were talking about the 2-year treatment side?
Right, I'm sorry. So when I say the nitrate is, when I was talking about nitrate getting close to background, I misspoke. I meant to say sort of near detection.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense because the background I was looking at here was a lot messier than that.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
On that note, you can continue to see, if you look at the control wells, you can see how the nitrate is bouncing up and down through time. So that's just, we're continuing to see quite a lot of variability in nitrate that's coming into the site, which is one really interesting finding from this study.
Um,
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Hey, Steve.
Hi, Eric. Kristen promoted me to a panelist. Thank you. Do you have any idea, Matt, or do you have funding to keep monitoring the 2-year treatment one long enough to find out when it wears out?
We don't. We do not. And that, I don't know when it's appropriate to start talking about that. We've certainly always on the lookout for funding opportunities. The next EPA SNAP competition, will be coming out, I would think, any day now. However, I don't know that the funding, if we were to get some renewal funding from them for this, whether or not that would come in time to keep the quarterly monitoring. But yeah, that's something that we should talk about as a committee. Have a contingency plan in place if we want to keep monitoring that.
Because that was one of the main goals of the whole project, to estimate the cost that way. And if it stopped right now, you couldn't make a very accurate estimate.
Yeah, so if we continue with the next 2 quarterly events, and let's just say hypothetically that for this 2-year PRB, the nitrate values continue to remain at low levels, downgrading of the PRB. We know that 2 years worth of EVO, at least in this instance, equals 2 years, at least 2 years of EVO, if not more. You know, we're already, there's actually, if you look really at the details at some of these profiles, and actually I'll just bring that in right now since we're asking about it. If you look at the 2-year PRB right here, this is the -8 foot level that I just showed you. -5 and 0 are all very low. And the PRB is continuing to perform its duty at these 3 depths, but we've seen at this level right here, -16, the nitrate values have been creeping up. They crept up in August, and now they've crept up in November to the point that they're indistinguishable from the upgradient well. So we can see that we've actually seen parts of the 2-year PRB start to fail. However, we know we're measuring the organic carbon concentration at a number of these depths, and we know that there's lots of EVO remaining in these depths, in this depth range here. So that, even without additional nutrient measurements, you know, that gives us an idea of how long this PRB is going to continue to chug along. You can see the continued decrease in the EVO concentration.
Matt, how much does a quarter's worth of sampling cost? I mean, not to the penny, but the ballpark figure.
Yeah, it's like a hair under $50 per sample. So I could do that math for you. I mean, you look at the number of dots on this map.
Yeah, I just try to figure out if the EPA thing doesn't work out. I mean, this is really good stuff. And as Steve has emphasized, we want to really dope out the time course of events if we can. I mean, that's when it's really meaningful if we want to look at return on investment. And I just, like I say, maybe something to discuss at another meeting, but if we had an idea that perhaps some EPA money was coming along, maybe we could somehow find funding for 1 or 2 quarterly sampling regimes, and with the idea that it would be picked up later. But again, I have no idea how that would work out in detail.
Yeah, would your next presentation be the time to talk about that? You've only got 6 months left, I gather.
It's true. I guess it did kind of sneak up on us a bit. Hadn't really thought too much about what we're going to do when the money runs out.
Something tells me a grant application for 1 more year of testing is not going to be as appealing as the initial grant was to any funding source. But if there was sort of a skeleton way of doing it that we could fund, using local funds, that might be worth knowing how much that was. Without all the overhead and the bells and the whistles that the usual funding sources ask for.
Yep. Okay.
And one cost-cutting idea would be, since we've seen such what I call almost clear-cut results on the 2-year side, just cut the sampling by half spatially. And if we had to focus on one side.
It could be greatly scaled down even by a quarter, right? Because we know it's the top half of the 2-year PRD is where we need to keep looking. So
anyway,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you got the gist of it. We want to keep this going somehow, and I'm sure you do too. Any other comments or questions? Steve Rafferty.
Yeah, I'm going to step into the bigger picture if I can. Presuming that the data keeps going in the direction you've been gathering it, what is the scale up and/or applicability of this technology? My recollection a long time ago was trying to trench all the way along the shoreline of any estuary was going to be a permitting nightmare. Do you see this as being applicable to certain, say, hotspots that get identified one way or another as a remediation cleanup, or a permanent installation that gets replenished yearly? Where does this go? Where does this technology go?
Well, I think in terms of permitting, the idea is to go along a right of way wherever possible. And also, you want to be set back from the estuary. Is it 200 feet? I forget what it may differ by town, but you don't want to be doing this.
I don't think you can be any closer than 80 feet according to the state for injection.
And Falmouth Concom will be you'll be in their clutches if you're within 100. So.
But
Same zip code.
that'll all be sort of, I think, a part of the cost estimate that we come up with. We'll nail, since the EVO, the vegetable oil, is a huge expense of this technology. We can nail down that number of, life expectancy of PRB for a gallon of EVO. In addition to the installation costs are pretty straightforward to estimate. That's a major goal of this whole effort, is to try and come up with a more firm number of the cost of this nitrogen treatment for this technology. Because we looked at there was, I guess, a report that was prepared before I was a member of this committee, and the number was absurd. I know for a fact that the cost of treatment will be a lot lower than what was provided by that.
So, staying with your comment and that Kristen helped us with, if there's certain criteria, i.e. it has to be a right of way, and it has to be at least 80 feet back from the coastal line, is there a way to go to Bob Shea and get a GIS map that would show where those locations are, whether it's 5% of any given estuary or 100% of any given estuary? I mean, if at the end of the day, there's a lot of locations, that's great. If at the end of the day, it's a very small handful, we should know what we're doing.
Can I enter the discussion briefly here and talk
Tom, and then
about
Ken,
my
and then Jordan.
castle in the clouds approach? We mentioned already in passing treating hot spots. We've got pretty good information that there's a big old plume of nitrate loaded water coming into the Coonamessett River from the east, right? So picture a half mile of injection wells parallel to the Coonamessett River right in the John Parker Road right away. To me, that would be a spectacular achievement on our part, because the Coonamessett River is 55% of the nitrogen loading of Great Pond. And if we could put this, and I don't expect it to work 100%, but these kind of results, which are just downstream from where I'm talking about plugging this big thing in, I would be really excited and love to figure out some way we could scale that up. But anyway, I'll be quiet now.
Well, that's exactly what I was looking for, Tom. Like,
Yeah.
Is there a viable location, that we, get benefit out of it? So, yeah.
Ken,
Yeah, following on Tom's point, I think we know the town well enough to say, places like what Tom's referring to, or possibly I've always had a fondness for Edgewater Drive, Seacoast Shores, where I know that concentrations are really high. It's going to be a long time before it gets sewered, if ever. And this might be, I empathize with the idea that digging it all up for wood chips wasn't viable, but injecting EVO might be. And so, I think there's places, I don't know that we need an extensive GIS analysis. I think we could say to Bob, here's 3 locations where we want to see if it's a possibility.
Jordan.
I'm just thinking that if the Coonamessett is an option for the future, is that something that we could sort of bundle that project with additional monitoring at match sites as a SNAP proposal? Because that might be slightly more, intriguing for a funding source and, scaling it up. You know,
Yeah.
if we're finding pretty, you know, positive or promising results from this initial phase, you know, maybe adding to the scope with Coonamessett River might be a good way to get some more funding too.
That has a lot of appeal, I think, to funders too, because it's an immediate project. It's not something we're just dreaming up to do in 20 years. You know, we got to do something about Great Pond now. So yeah, I like that.
And I just wanted to add, I know, you know, grant proposals can be a heavy lift, so I'm happy to help if we get to that point.
Yeah. We're joined by wastewater superintendent Amy Lowell. Hello, Amy.
Hi, I've
we-
been off video, but I turned on my video because I did have a question, which is, I wasn't sure what Tom was referring to. You seem to think everybody knew what you're referring to, but what's coming in on what's this source of nitrogen that you're talking about on the east side of Coonamessett River?
Now I'm on thin ice here, but my understanding is it's an old plume coming out of the open wastewater lagoons at Joint Base Cape Cod. But I don't know for sure, but I do know that if you look at Chris Neal's data for the Coonamessett River, the overall nitrogen levels double suddenly in that stretch of the river between the John Parker Road Bridge and the stretch down to where the most recent pedestrian bridge is over the river. I'd have to go back, look at it in detail. I think if I remember back, and I'm trying to remember, I think Virginia might have been one of the advocates for that idea way back when.
Yeah, so that's the Ashumet Valley plume from the base. And I guess I'd have to look back at the maps of what they thought their plume was. I guess I thought that, well, doesn't matter what I think, which I can, if you're trying to nail down where it goes, where to put something, then you'd want to know more about what the issues are there.
Yeah.
Chris Neal owes us a report in a reasonably short time. So he'll be in to clarify that question.
What's the
The
most-
other classic way of looking for hotspots is looking at ice cover in the winter and seeing places around the shoreline that don't freeze.
Yep.
And that tells you that's a place where you got groundwater coming in like mad.
We've already done it. We did drone thermal surveys of the Coonamessett. So
Cool.
Wintertime aerial photography is a great way to find those places.
Matt, you say you've done that?
yeah, we already did it for the Coonamessett River Foundation.
For the whole river.
Yeah. Mhm.
Wow, beautiful. Okay. Sometime this year, we're gonna have a gathering of the towns that have been doing PRBs to exchange notes, probably when this project is closer to ending its contract, but definitely this year. 'Cause there's others out there that are doing the same thing we are in different places, and we should all learn together what we're doing. Any other comments or questions on this? We're also joined by Paul Dreyer from the planning board. A little incognito, but we know you're there, Paul. But,
Does Doug Brown know that his camera is still on?
I think he's proud of the fact that it's still on.
Doug is sort of doing a dance here.
Am I bothering you with that? Sorry.
I saw Steve reaching for his Dramamine.
All right, any other on this, comments or questions on this one okay, good. This next one will be brief. Every so often, every year, the town receives a request from the Cape Cod Commission to update the information that we have provided them for their 208 plan. Kristen has sent around a 2-page draft compliance report, as they call it. And she has also sent around her own list of amendments to it, which she thinks things they've either overlooked or forgotten or had wrong in the first place. Does anyone, you want to run through them, Kristen, and then we can see if anybody else has thought of anything else that needs
Sure.
correcting?
So as Eric said, and for those of you who are new to the committee, this is a report that's put out by the Cape Cod Commission. They started doing this, I think, 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. It's basically their way to keep a quick reference on what the towns are doing for each of their watersheds. So every year they ask us to review the information to make sure that they've captured everything that they know about and that we know about. So it goes through basically historically, the town meeting approved funding, grants that have gone through, how many sewer connections have been made. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to read. So I went through, looked at what didn't quite make sense. Eric and I talked on the list of the comments. I felt that collaborators, USGS, MBL, and East Falmouth Village Association should be added. Eric thought we could remove the town of Barnstable and the town of Sandwich because we haven't done anything with them, at least in this reporting period. For the implementation projects over here on page 2, my only suggestion, they have the Eel River Shellfish Demonstration Project coded as a restoration project. I don't know that the goal of that project is restoration. I almost feel like it should be more remediation. That was nitpicking. I also thought under the town implementation actions, we should mention the initial drafting of the IA bylaw that John has been working on. And then I also had a conversation with one of the people at the commission about how to handle AFC funds. So when the select board votes the AFC funds that were an external funding source to the town, how that gets captured, because it's not a new external grant, it's just allocated toward these specific projects. So they thought that that might go in the town funding actions. So that would include the funds that were allocated for the Little Pond baseline survey, as well as the Herring Brook and some of the Mill Pond work.
Okay, have we missed anything or anything in there that shouldn't be in there? I think you've all had a chance to look at this.
It sounds very good to me, Kristen. I think your suggestions are really good ones. And just as a little peripheral thing there, can you remind us how much is left in the AFC account right now?
You'd have to ask Selectman Doug Brown that one.
Oh,
Amy might know too, if she's still here.
okay, I just thought we might have a general idea of what we had left there because, you know, for so many
I'll
years,
look it up.
it looked like a piggy bank that we could just kind of dive into, and I don't want us to get rudely surprised at some point.
Amy will be distressed if you call it a piggy bank. It's her piggy bank.
The other, it's probably splitting hairs, but what do you see as the difference between a remediation project and a restoration project?
I feel like the remediation is you're cleaning up pollutants that have already entered, whereas restoring, I don't know. I don't know what their definition is, but I feel like the shellfish aren't going to restore the estuary as a whole. I feel like they're more helping to clean it up on a smaller scale. That's just kind of how I view it. It is splitting hairs, like I said.
It's actually sort of like a pilot project because the real goal is to see if we can get the shellfish guys to do this and get the DEP to agree on the value of it and do it in a lot of different places. If both those two things work out. So
I see what Tom's saying, though. Everything we're trying to do is for reduction, right? I mean, that's our main objective here. But yeah.
Amy?
I was just going to say the amount unobligated, meaning the the amount that's not committed to something in the AFC fund is $660,000.
That's it.
That's
So
it.
there's $1.1 million remaining, if you look at just the account number, but the Herringbrook study, the outfall modeling, and the Great Pond TWMP are all underway. So those are obligations that will bring it down to $660,000.
I think it started around 8 million, wasn't it?
Yes.
And most of it has gone to GHD, is that fair to say?
No, most of it went to land purchases.
Oh, much better.
The golf course, the Augusta parcel, the
Beautiful.
a lot of it. I mean, it didn't pay for 100% of the land purchases, but it was a big part of the land purchases that were envisioned to have some sort of nutrient reduction associated with them.
True enough. Okay. Well, any other comments or question on the commission's compliance, so-called compliance report? We've got.
I guess I had
Kristen's-
a couple questions.
Sure.
What is the definition of a collaboration? What like puts an organization on that list?
What would you like it to be?
Right.
Well, I guess, so we're, SMAS is doing that study
Yeah.
on Herringbrook, so I didn't know if they should be listed. I know it's contracted, but seems like a collaboration of sorts. And then I wasn't sure, I know Wacoit Bay has been, Webner has been involved in the oyster aquaculture stuff, as far as, that lease that's right in front of the bluff there. And then also like a tiny bit sort of on the outreach side of the Eel Pond pilot project.
You're
So I
right.
wasn't
Webner
sure
should,
if like
Web-
Webner should be
Webner
on
should
that
definitely
list.
be on the list.
I think so.
Yes.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, and we have SMAS on the list as far as getting a contract. But do you want to put them on the collaboration list?
I didn't have a strong opinion. I just
No.
thought I'd
Their
mention it.
SMAS is part of the town team as opposed to collaborator, because
Okay.
they do all the pond watch monitoring. They do a heavy load as
Oh,
far as,
I see it now. They are, yep.
yeah, they're on the town team.
Right, but Webner's a good catch. They're on the team.
Yes.
They're not on the team, but they're collaborators.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Update on discussions with Mashpee and Sandwich on developing an intermunicipal agreement for Wacoit Bay nitrogen load allocation and reduction. Tom Duncan.
All right. First of all, I want to point out Eric has been the one that has kept the home fires smoldering, if not actually burning on this thing. He can tell you this whole idea has gone back for years. And from the time I've been on the committee, all we heard from Mashpee was, we're probably not going to spend any money because we know that the shellfish will solve the problem for us. And I think for a variety of reasons, several years ago, there was quite a turnaround in their approach. And we've had a couple of joint meetings with our equivalent there, which is the Mashpee Sewer Commission. And we've expressed a desire to get going on a formal agreement, assigning responsibilities for the an intermunicipal agreement, assigning responsibilities for what is happening in Wacoit Bay and what might happen in the future as far as remediation or restoration, depending on our operative term. And they have been recently very open to that. And what Kristen did was use the existing agreement that they used for the Three Bays project there, and she's gone through and substituted appropriate language in here. And I'm not, everyone got a copy, I think, of the agreement, right? I hope. And I've got a tool here called a whereas machete, Kristen, and I'm gonna cut through a page and a half of whereases and move to the middle of page 2. And the important thing to note there is that Falmouth, having the largest bit of everything at stake, and it's only by a small amount compared to Mashpee's thing, we would be the responsible management partner from the fiscal standpoint, in terms of keeping the books and monitoring expenses and having our hands on all the funding there. That's not unusual at all. But on the middle of the third page, item 5, where we start assigning responsibilities for what has happened and what might happen in the future. Basically, since GHD is working for both us and Mashpee, they have not argued at all with the numbers, unattenuated and attenuated loadings for the different watersheds and the total thereof. And the way that we've split things up is we're going to use the attenuated loading. And we did have one sandwich. I forget his title. Eric, do you remember his title?
It was from the deep water.
He had it with DPW.
Yeah.
Dave Mash, is it Dave?
I
Not
thought he
Dave.
was I thought he was health department.
I'm thinking he was health department,
Okay.
but anyway, due to Sandwich's distance from the watershed there, if you look at the table there, attenuated load is cut in half as a proportion of what the unattenuated load is. So they are on board with that part of it. Anyway, the attenuated load, what's actually reaching Wacoit Bay itself, would be the basis for assigning expenses for any joint projects or other things that we were involved with. And then about a third of the way down on page 4, you notice that there's provisions for nitrogen credit trading arrangements, where if one of the parties is doing or fortuitously been able to remove more nitrogen than another party, there would be a procedure or a basis for assigning an economic value to these credits and do some kind of trading back and forth to meet the requirements for the entire watershed for the removal. And Eric, I'd like to hear what you might add. I mean, I went through this really quickly.
Yeah, well, we basically took the model from the 3 bays and
Pompanesett Bay.
Pompanesett Bay and reconfigured it to be appropriate for this one. The big concern a couple of years ago, which is where this kind of got bogged down, was Mashpee was very insistent that we sign on to a watershed permit, and we were very insistent that we not. And so they've now agreed that we will have an agreement, and it won't be a watershed permit, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But we're not committing to any watershed permit. We're committing to our 50% or whatever, 46% or whatever our percentage of the load to be dealt with is, and we're committing to do it in a friendly way with them, and we're committing to have sort of a three-member body that would deal with a 3-member body from them on a regular basis to keep us each appraised of what the other is doing. So that's the draft. It's going to go over there for their comments. It's here for our comments, and at the end we'll come up with something. And if Amy likes it and the selectmen like it, the town will enter into it. But
So Eric, we didn't send it to the committee yet because we're waiting for the initial review from the working group. So everyone else on the committee is very confused because they have a document.
My apologies.
oh well, my apologies. I guess we should have said that at the beginning.
Yeah, I wasn't quite the blind leading the blind, but I did want to make one point that I thought Eric.
So
No
what
wonder
we
there were no
did,
comments.
so
Yeah.
we met with Sandwich and Mashpee, and we had these discussions, and Eric and I went through the Pompanesett IMA and tweaked it to fit what came out of the discussions. And that draft has been circulated between the groups that attended those initial meetings for their initial review. Once we get their feedback, that's when we're gonna start distributing it to the committee at large. But
Yeah.
steps are happening to get to a formal agreement is kind of the short version of it.
That's my fault. I should have checked with Kristen to see what district, I assumed that it had gone out to, I didn't check the distribution
and
list on that.
I think
One other,
the thinking was we did, newspapers cover our meetings.
right,
And I don't think it would have been good for Mashpee and Sandwich to have us get that far ahead of them.
right. And I will make one point here too. There's no timetable in this agreement to reach certain standards, and we've made it clear to the people in Mashpee who would like to see Falmouth jump on and shake and fix Wacoit Bay immediately, that we're going to be a long time getting right to Wacoit Bay proper, largely because right now we've got Great Pond in front of us, and we went over in a very brief manner our goals for Great Pond, which are about 50% greater than our removal goals for Wacoit Bay. So again, I think that's a key point of the agreement, is we're not having our feet held to the fire with some sort of perhaps unenforceable timetable.
Exactly.
I was frantically looking through my emails for this.
I'm sorry, that was
this agreement. I didn't remember seeing. So I sort of missed the background on it. Is this following up on GHD did like at least a year and a half ago?
Yes.
This memo dividing up the allocation, doing the nutrient allocation.
February of 20, if you go back and look through the memos, it's February of oh, I had it right in front of me.
So those are the numbers.
February 2020, almost 2 years ago.
When you're talking about allocation, that's what came out of that. Okay.
That's where they did the comparison of the 3 different ways of modeling the contributions per watershed. And I don't have to remind members, I don't think, that there's 48 sub watersheds called out for Wacoit Bay. So it can be sliced and diced many, many different ways.
I think the take home was that both Mashpee, Sandwich, and Falmouth were comfortable using those numbers for a basis of an agreement.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very important point.
Yeah.
I would suggest that somebody think very hard in the future about exactly how you're going to determine what credit to give people, what they've removed, especially what extra they might have removed, or you're going to have a can of worms.
Well, I think that comes out of those smoke-filled back rooms, Steve. But yeah, that's going, if we did get to that point, that provision was included as an option.
So I'm a little confused by that, and I apologize for the need of extra clarity, but does that mean, for example, that if Falmouth got sort of more nitrogen load removed out of the like Eel River, Childs River area,
Right.
that we could sort of sell those credits or something to Mashpee so that there wouldn't be quite as much requirement for them for like Hamblin Pond?
Right, that's looking at the big picture thing. It's a similar thing with air pollution credit trading that's gone on for quite a while and has created a lot of rancor among certain groups. But it makes very practical sense because it encourages people, for whatever reason. We might be really lucky with something that we find happening, as you mentioned, in the Eel River or Childs River. And it would encourage us to really do a nice job over there, knowing that perhaps we couldn't send the bill, but we could say to Mashpee, you know, if you don't have to do this over here, we can make this work here. But it's an opportunistic kind of planning, but it does work.
Yeah, it just seems odd to me because the nitrogen load that you're removing from Eel or Childs River, it never would have impacted, well, not in any immediate terms anyway, Hamblin Pond. So it seems like
Right,
Hamblin Pond kind of gets the shaft.
right.
And ends up having a higher nitrogen load than it should. Right.
Yeah, no,
I guess I'm a little concerned by that provision.
well, you should be. And of course, as we've emphasized to Mashpee too, trying to figure out what we may or may not have done on the west side of Wacoit Bay because of the interconnections and the tidal current flushing back and forth between it. It would be hard to document what's happening in the basin proper of Wacoit Bay. And of course, by the time you get to the east side, like you're talking about Hamlin Pond and stuff, it would be really tough.
Yeah. Okay.
So
George, that's the
Jordan,
point. And if there's a sentinel station in Hamlin Pond, Mashpee can't make use of any credit to get around it. They have to meet the sentinel station.
That's a good point, Steve.
Yeah. Kristen,
so Jordan, when GHD did the allocation, they actually divided it up by sub watershed. So it's not each of the three main sections. So Red Brook, Hamlin Pond, all of those are all partitioned out. So it's not necessarily a clear 45% allocation for Mashpee all across the board. So it varies in the different locations. So while there is room for nitrogen trading credit, if you look at the way those numbers are, everything on the western side is all Falmouth. So we're basically trading credits with ourselves between overages and Eel Pond versus Childs River. And how everything plays out on the east is still very much up in the air for your points exactly. But it's broken down by sub watershed.
well, as soon as we get word back from Sandwich and Mashpee, you will all have a draft to consider.
Okay, and again, my apologies. I should have looked closely at the distribution list when this went out, but I assumed it was the whole committee. And hopefully later it will be clearer.
Yes. Okay,
I
any
just
other
have one
comments?
other question,
Okay.
which is if you're working with Town of Sandwich on this, shouldn't we keep them on our compliance report?
Well, we weren't working with them until
Right.
2022.
Right.
Okay.
Right. When
That
it
was
comes
it,
up,
right.
it will show up.
We'll
Yes,
get them next
exactly.
year.
Right. In fact, we had never exchanged a word with them until 2022, but now we're great friends. So, so they get on the list. Okay, any other
Eric,
report? Oh,
Eric,
I'm sorry, Steve, yeah.
That's okay. Since it's acknowledged that you're building on the Pompanesett model, they are at what stage ahead of, say, the Wacoit thing, and are there lessons to be learned and or feedback loops that will be available on the sort of administration of this document? I mean, I hear a lot of concern about things like trading credits, and there might be other little nuances in this. So to the extent that Pompanesett one's in place and something's actually happening and it's working, hopefully it's better than the Steamship Authority's board.
Well, it's a fair question. If there's anything actually going on in Papaneset Bay, certainly Mashpee has not gotten any sewering up there. And Sandwich has done nothing up there. I don't know what Barnstable may have done. That's a fair question.
And without trying to open this all up, didn't they do some agreements like this further down the Cape on Pleasant Bay or whatever? And how do those, has anybody taken a look to see how those agreements
Yes.
look and or compare?
Pleasant Bay is a little different. Pleasant Bay was a watershed permit. In fact, I think it's the only one that I know of that's actually been agreed to by the parties. And it's sort of an example of why we're a little leery of watershed permits.
Okay.
Because they've been doing a lot of looking, and the more they look at the alternatives, the more they find that they don't meet the DEP's standards that have been set forth in the watershed permit. And so they're kind of leading themselves into more sewering than they had in mind because they entered into a watershed permit. So we're watching out for that.
Thank you.
What do you see as the goal of this work with Mashpee? I mean, to me, the point of doing the allocation was to set the bar for future planning processes, you know, and for, you know, what is our load to deal with, and what's a concept for how to deal with that. But what's the goal of signing an agreement of any kind with Mashpee?
Can I?
Tom,
Yeah. I think the key point here is a formal arrangement for peer-to-peer communication between these three-person committees appointed by the select board, at least of Falmouth, and I assume of the other towns, and just to kind of keep each group in the loop, I think, particularly when we in Mashpee in particular have such a vested interest in what happens in Wacoit Bay, not so much on Sandwich's part. But that's what I see as a big plus of having a formal agreement and calling in 6 months or 9 months, or God forbid, a year from now, and saying, you know, we haven't heard anything from you guys. Can we have a joint meeting? Because other than the meetings of the past several weeks, I think it had been at least 2 years since we had, is that correct, Eric? Since we'd had a meeting with the Mashpee Sewer Commission?
yes.
I think it would have been at least 2 years.
Yeah.
And I, for one, would like to be able to not to have to go and look over the fence to see what's happening over there. And anyway, that's my spin on it.
It's also a requirement laid out in the 208 plan by the commission that there should be a formal agreement in place. And when that came out, they wanted the formal agreement in place a year after that came out. So we're lacking very far behind by their standards, but Falmouth works on its own time frame.
Yeah, and it would be a memorandum of understanding. It would not be a watershed permit or anything that commits us to anything that we
Right.
can't get out of. Let's put it that way. But
Yeah,
we do have-
I do want to be very cautious because of the huge amount of money that's potentially
Sure.
involved, you know, and the town is quite a ways from being able to do.
No, we're with you on that.
big projects.
You could look it over before it goes any further, just to.
Yeah,
make sure. You'll feel better when you see it, because it's
Right,
got a
well,
lot
I
of-
hear what you're saying. It doesn't have a time frame in it. That's a big part of
It
it.
doesn't have a time
Yeah.
frame, and it doesn't even commit us to sewer in any particular area. All it commits us to is that the percentage that is our responsibility. And I think we've already conceded that. We do have a big constituency in Wacoit and in Seco Shores and elsewhere that have been saying for a while, you know, we haven't heard a peep out of this committee on our behalf. And why aren't you talking to Mashpee? Why aren't you blah, blah, blah? So this answers that concern for a while.
And Wacoit Bay is definitely number 2 on our list in terms of the actual amount of nitrogen we want to corral and get out. So it's big in a couple of ways.
Right. Any other comments or questions on the intermunicipal agreement concept? If not, any report of members and staff? Tom?
I'm going to just say something very quickly, and this time I think everyone got Kristen sent out, circulated a copy of an article from last week's Martha's Vineyard Times about Tisbury establishing denitrification regulations. And in particular, I'd like to get John Waterbury's comments on what you think of their rules versus what we might try to do here in Falmouth.
Well, that was almost an exact copy of what we've been talking about, except they don't include the 15-year drop dead date. And so if you're trying to actually eventually get everyone, you need to have an end date where you say, if after 15 years you haven't been caught, otherwise it's exactly the same list of things we've been thinking about. And they did it by Board of Health regulation rather than going to town meeting with a bylaw.
That's an interesting point. And if I understand the figure here, 60% of the land area of Tisbury is in one of those 2 land areas, in one of those 2 watersheds, excuse me, And I think 53% of the land parcels in the town fall in one of those two watersheds. So it's pretty
They're-
significant compared to,
I'm talking about the entire watershed instead of a 300-foot.
right. Very expansive.
Right. I have a call into the Martha's Vineyard Commission, who's just gotten a $750,000 grant to do something around IAs. And I'm wondering if they aren't thinking about a financial incentive or possibly providing one of Mr. Smith's boxes to the homeowners, or so there's got to be more to it than just that regulation from, but we'll find out.
One of the things that came up today, which might be of interest to both Amy and Eric, when we gave people a $10,000 grant in West Falmouth, did they have to pay taxes on that $10,000? And when we gave them the pumps in Little Pond for $4,000, did that count as income and each of those homeowners had to pay? Apparently that's the case with, if you give people a grant,
Yeah.
that counts as income.
Even
So
if they can spend
the
it?
pumps did not. The town, I'd have to go back and think about it a bit, but the town did not 1099 the pumps is the way it was described. And it's because it was considered a reimbursement, not a, I don't know, a gift or a grant or whatever, that we were paying them back for funds that they'd expended. So that was the call.
Amy's talking about the 1,800 that they got a couple of years
Yes, I'm
later.
talking about the pumps, the
Right.
Grinder pump
Right,
reimbursement.
John may be asking about.
Well, that's
You
what
were
I was
asking about
asking
both.
about in Little Pond, but it's pretty clear that the $10,000 we gave people in West Falmouth,
Mhm.
all those people are at the 28% tax bracket. They all of a sudden got a bill for 28% of that $10,000.
But they
I
should
don't
be
know.
able to deduct what they had to spend.
Well,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's not a business expense. I mean,
You set up a small sole proprietorship just for that project.
Well, it's too late now.
I bet Buzzards Bay Coalition knows the answer to that question.
What was
We
it?
got asked, I know the answer for the grinder pumps because we got asked that question 10,000 times. And I'm sure they did for the
Yeah.
for the West Falmouth project. I
for the
don't know
West
the
Falmouth
answers.
project, if people did that on a voluntary basis, they weren't required by any statutes or
Right.
rules or laws or to
Right.
do it. So I think it's income.
Yep. I'm inclined to say, to agree with Ken on that count.
Well, the
No, they
coalition
weren't
would,
required to do it, but they were required to spend it in order to get the grant. No
well,
one got the grant without being required to spend it.
Right, but it added to the infrastructure on their property. They own it.
true.
If you go out and if someone gives you
None of
$1
us-
million
none of us-
to go buy a
Yeah.
diamond, you're up, you
Time out.
know.
None of us are tax lawyers.
Yes.
None of us are professional accountants. John's point is, anytime you set up these type of grant programs,
Right.
we
That's a
need to
fact.
set them up with our eyes
It's been
open.
a huge issue in Suffolk County in New York.
It was.
And they've
With our
been
eyes
working with
open. We
Senator
have to go in with
Schumer.
our eyes open.
Yep.
Have to go in with our eyes open and make sure we know and communicate to anybody that takes a grant, whether it's a taxable amount or not. And that determination can be made by somebody who's a tax lawyer or a professional accountant, not by my opinion. I'll say that.
Right.
Not by our vote this afternoon.
No. Okay. Any other reports of members and staff or tax advice? Okay. We're doing this rather rapidly here, 1 hour. Okay.
Do you
Minutes
want
of
a
the prior-
little, sorry, Eric, I
go
don't
ahead,
mean
sure.
to interrupt
Oh,
you. I
sure, no,
just,
no, no.
should I mention, you and I had that conversation about the stormwater management project at boat ramps, and I just thought maybe
sure.
I should
Yes,
share it with
absolutely,
the
yeah.
whole committee.
Yeah.
So APCC was awarded a SNEP grant this past fall to basically hire an engineering firm to design stormwater remediation retrofits for public boat ramps, pretty much across Cape Cod, but basically sort of the SNEP region of that, which ends up being the southernmost towns. And we're looking at both coastal and freshwater water bodies that have public boat ramps. And I just mentioned it to Eric and Kristen a few weeks ago, in case, you know, Falmouth wanted to be more involved in this project. I did talk to Chuck Martinson after that meeting that we had, and was able to get some more traction there. And the good thing is it looks like the Wacoit Bay landing site and the Ashumet Pond public boat ramps, both of those are on our sort of preliminary list and sort of waiting to be confirmed with the town. So I just wanted to provide an update that it looks like APCC might, you know, include those two sites within Falmouth as part of the project.
Great.
That's it.
Great, good to know. Okay, everyone has received a copy of the minutes of the prior meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Tom?
Kristen, I want to congratulate Kristen. She's gotten so good with these that it's almost like a little Easter egg hunt. I feel like a 5-year-old turned loose in a 5-acre field trying to.
Eric keeps telling me to leave things in there just for you.
Yeah, I heard she puts typos in on purpose, just for.
Sometimes.
It's called Easter
Sometimes
eggs
as I don't have my glasses
software
on.
programs too. But very, very quickly, the top of page 2, the end of that the last sentence in the paragraph where you're talking about Chuck's. There's an extra comma after permitting.
Yup, got it.
You got it? Have you squished it? And I don't even know what color that egg is. I'm partial to the turquoise colored one. And then the general tradition in the end of that sentence, it says 5 years, I think, is to spell out numbers up to either 10 or 20. It's a, you know.
In scientific language, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, just spell out
changed it
5
for
in
you.
that first sentence, so Eric's comments there. You may want to spell out 3-year project in that first sentence. And then last of all, we're getting to the end, folks. Under reports of members and staff, talking about meeting representatives from Mashpee to discuss both towns' planning efforts. The apostrophe should come after the S.
Yep.
And that's it. Congratulations.
That's 3, Kristen. This is not good.
I'm going to stop now. But no, seriously, you've done
Okay.
you've done a super job.
I would move to approve the minutes that include Tom's mostly grammatical.
Yes,
And
nothing
punctuation error.
substantive.
Okay, moved and
I'll second.
Seconded.
any number of people to adopt them as amended. Discussion, I'll signify in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand, aye, whatever.
Hey, Eric,
Anybody opposed?
Eric, on a Zoom meeting, don't you have to do a roll call?
Oh, God help us.
So you did, much like Tom did
Steve
the
Yes, you
Rafferty.
do.
little things. I think on the
All
Zoom
right.
calls, you have to do a.
Okay, roll call. Ken Forman,
Ken Forman, aye.
Steve Rafferty,
Steve Rafferty, aye.
Matt Charette,
I approve.
Jordan,
Aye.
I go aye.
John,
Aye.
myself, aye. Okay, we got it all. Now we come to the,
What about the next meeting dates?
Yes.
would normally be February, well, let's see now, this is February, this is January 27th. No, wait, what is
Today's
this?
the 24th.
It's 24th.
24th. So the next one would normally be February 7th. How's that sound?
As long as it's not the 14th.
Okay, it would, 7th is not the 14th.
No one else knows the significance of the 14th, so I'm going to be quiet.
Valentine's Day. All right. Sounds like it's the 7th unless there's grave objection.
Works well.
Okay.
For me.
4
Matt?
4 PM. 4
4
PM.
Same, yeah, probably Zoom, but we'll see how things are. Certainly it's convenient.
All right, you ready for the motion to adjourn, Mr.
We were
Chairman?
waiting for you.
I
All
just
right,
had
motion to
one-
adjourn.
Oh,
Oh,
we
Wait,
have-
Jordan's talking.
Jordan,
I just had one sort of follow-up question about the videos that we watched. I think it was Steve maybe mentioned putting them on Falmouth TV so that they could be watched by the general public. And I just wanted to follow
Yes.
up and see if that's something that happened or could happen.
I can reach out to FCTV. I haven't. To see.
I think it was mostly the, the one that Chuck
Yep.
initially, not the Science Collaborative one that's like a million years
Right.
old.
the one that Chuck did was really
Yep.
gripping.
Yeah, that one was
Yeah.
really good.
Yep, I'll reach out to them.
Cool, thanks.
The sound wasn't as good as it could have been. I don't know if that was just because.
That's because of the way it was broadcast through the system in the meeting room.
Okay, good. But if it was on TV, it'd be all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to adjourn till the 7th of February. All in favor? We're going to take a roll call vote on this one. Thank you.
Yes, I think so.
Okay,
Rafferty, aye.
Steve, aye. Ken Foreman, you're muted, but I see a hand. Okay.
Aye.
Matt Charetz and I. Jordan,
Bye.
aye. Tom,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
me, aye. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Everyone stay safe, please.
Over and out.
Bye-bye.
I
Take care.